before being able to learn about constructing an Eruv, we first have to understand what it is that an Eruv comes to solve. What exactly is the Isur of carrying on Shabbat? Where does it exist? What are the different domains within which or between which transferring items is restricted? So we're going to run through right now the Daled Reshuyot on Shabbat, the 4 different domains on Shabbat. According to the Torah, there are actually only 3 Reshuyot, 3 domains on Shabbat, which means you could divide the entire world into 3 separate domains. One is a Reshut HaRabim, a public domain. Second is a Reshut HaYachid, a private domain. And the third is a Makom Petur, an exempt area. And if you wanted to divide up the world in patchwork, and patch here, patch there, throughout the entire world, the world can be divided up into these 3 Reshuyot. Okay, Reshut HaYachid, Reshut HaRabim, and Makom Petur. The rabbis, however, divided a Makom Petur, this exempt area, into 2 separate Reshuyot with very different halachot, which brings us to a total of 4 Reshuyot on Shabbat. Reshut HaYachid, Reshut HaRabim, a Carmelit, and a Makom Petur. A Carmelit, which we are going to see, is going to be somewhere between a Reshut HaYachid and a Reshut HaRabim. It's going to have certain characteristics like a private domain and certain characteristics like a public domain. So what is a Reshut HaYachid? A Reshut HaYachid is any area surrounded by walls, and the walls have to be at least 10 tefachim high. A tefach is somewhere between 3 to 4 inches, so we're talking 30 to 40 inches high. Certainly if it's 40 inches high, the walls are, and surrounded by walls, that would be your Reshut HaYachid. And the area within those walls needs to be at least 4 by 4 tefachim. So examples would be a house, a building, a fenced-in backyard, even a mound. If you look at the bottom right picture, there's a mound or a stone which has very steep walls, and the walls are 10 tefachim high. And on top, there's an area of 4 by 4 tefachim. So on top of that mound, on top of that stone, would be a Reshut HaYachid. Second is a Reshut HaRabim, a public domain, and that is any area which is 16 amot wide. An amma is 6 tefachim, so if you just do the calculations, we're talking somewhere between 24 to 32 feet. It has to be unroofed. There needs to be fewer than 3 walls, or if there are walls, then the street goes straight through the city. And in addition, it also cannot be private property. If it's owned by a private individual, even if everybody uses it, the main highway, it's still not going to be a Reshut HaRabim for purposes of Shabbat. Now there are 2 other criteria which I put in brackets because it's debatable whether or not they are real requirements for a Reshut HaRabim. The first is the need for 600,000 people to access that road. Highly debatable. We're going to discuss in class exactly whether that's a requirement, and even if that is a requirement, what exactly it means that 600,000 people access a road. Second is a limited access intercity highway, meaning sometimes you have, think for example in upstate New York, you have these highways which aren't major highways by any stretch of the imagination, but they are the highway, meaning that is the only highway which connects, that's the main highway which connects between one city and another city. So it could be that will constitute a Reshut HaRabim, even if it doesn't have the even if it's not straight, even if it doesn't have 600,000 people, that may be a Reshut HaRabim. Examples of a Reshut HaRabim: think Broadway in New York City. Again, the bottom left, think these intercity highways upstate New York. Rockefeller Center, interestingly enough, is not a Reshut HaRabim because it is privately owned. Okay, third is a Makom Petur, which is an exempt area, which is any area in the Reshut HaRabim which is less than 4 by 4 tefachim in terms of area. Right, so it has to be very narrow, and it's higher than 3 tefachim. Right, once it's higher than 3 tefachim, it's no longer considered part of the Reshut HaRabim. It's able to establish its own domain, and therefore, on top of that narrow garbage can or on top of the fire hydrant would be a Makom Petur. Finally, a Carmelit is essentially all other areas. And as you look at these areas, you notice that if they don't have all the criteria of Reshut HaYachid, they're not fenced in. They also don't have all the requirements of a Reshut HaRabim. Sometimes in terms of their ownership, sometimes because of the number of people who traverse these areas, or in terms of their width. They are somewhere in the middle, somewhere between a Reshut HaYachid and Reshut HaRabim, and therefore they have this special category designation as being a Carmelit. The sea, a garden, a playground, most suburban streets will also fall into this area, into this criteria, into this category of being a Carmelit. Okay, so now that we know the 4 different Reshuyot, so which movement is Asur on Shabbat? So if you look at the diagram in front of you, every place where there's an arrow, that's what's going to be Asur. But I want to just explain what's going on. Carrying from a Reshut HaYachid to a Reshut HaRabim, or vice versa, is Asur Midoraita. That is the Malacha on Shabbat. In addition, carrying 4 amot within a Reshut HaRabim is also part of the Isur Deoraita of carrying on Shabbat, to carry again 4 amot within the Reshut HaRabim. Midrabanan, carrying is restricted from a Reshut HaYachid to a Carmelit, or vice versa, as well as from a Reshut HaRabim to a Carmelit, and vice versa. And the reason is because a Carmelit is viewed as a mixture, again, this combination. It's somewhere in between a Reshut HaYachid and a Reshut HaRabim. So relative to a Reshut HaYachid, it's like a Reshut HaRabim, and therefore you can't carry from one to the other. Relative to a Reshut HaRabim, it's more like a Reshut HaYachid, and therefore you can't carry from a Reshut HaRabim to a Carmelit, and vice versa. In addition, since a Carmelit is treated like a Reshut HaRabim, carrying 4 amot within that Carmelit is also going to be restricted midrabanan. As you notice on this diagram, when it comes to a makom petur, there are no arrows, both between a makom petur and other reshuyot, and within the makom petur. All movement, all carrying involving a makom petur is going to be mutar. Once we understand all these reshuyot and we map out a location, a particular city in which we want to build an eruv, or a town, or even your own property, figuring out which parts are each reshut, then we could begin to figure out how exactly we're going to construct our eruv.